Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It's great pleasure to welcome our sixth session at Next Innovation Week US edition with a very interesting title, which is The Power of Customer Experience First Model, Exploring New Channels with Intelligent Customer Insights. And the speaker lineup, frankly speaking, looks really amazing. So from my left to the right, I'm pleased to welcome Sarah Leclerc from GSK. Hi, Sarah. How are you?
Hi.
Saad Sayed, coming from Pfizer, maybe the most famous pharma company these days, right, Saad? Hi, Saad, how are you?
I'm well, thank you. Thanks for having me here.
Unfortunately, Rorik won't join. He is facing some heavy cold, so hopefully he gets well very soon. And pleased to welcome Chris Wade from Omnipresence, or the experts in customer experience. Hi, Chris.
Thanks very much, Dario. Nice to be here.
Great. So before we start the discussion, I would like to launch a poll to ask all our audience some particular very interesting question, which is, which of the below do you believe to be most accurate? We have 4 possibilities to answer, so please take your time and answer on the question. I think that 1 minute is enough for the poll itself. Looking forward for the results. Oh, 35 more seconds. Panelists, on which question, on which answer would you bet?
We need to do a better job on CX pipelines.
I think so too.
Okay.
I'll go with Sarah and Saad as well.
We will close the pool very soon, and we are closing it now. So the results are 55% personalization is the final goal. Quite interesting. Who would like to comment on that?
So I think it's interesting because I think it's interesting because I think it looks at where people's minds are going to. Number 3 is more the problem, and I think number 4 is more the solution. So it's nice to think that people are thinking increasingly forward to look at what we're ultimately trying to achieve, because I think we will probably all agree on what some of the issues are.
Thank you, Sarah. Saad, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, I would sort of agree, right? Everybody wants to have contextual information. Everybody wants to get information that's relevant to them. So personalization from anybody sort of distributing that content or trying to draw that engagement, I think is that ultimate goal to sort of deepen the relationship.
Chris?
Yeah, I'll have to agree with both of my panelists. Yeah, the outcome, the outcome always should be what we're aiming for. Of course, personalization means different things to different people. We have to operate within some of the constraints from a regulatory standpoint, make personalization very difficult. But nonetheless, I think this session is going to be a really good focus on that. Is what are some of those ingredients that help us head towards that? Technology undoubtedly is a part of it, but mindset in an organization is the number one thing which is going to help us go in the right direction.
Speaking about the ingredients, I would say that definitely COVID was the catalyst for pharma to explore and accelerate, of course, in this whole digital transformation sphere and ecosystem. And of course, we implemented many new channels, right? So that's why I think it's very appropriate to claim we see huge potential and possibilities in those new channels. But what's definitely very interesting is that customer experience leaders need to reach customers in those new channels and new ways. And first question which I would like to ask is to Sarah, and this is that leaders focus these days on reaching customers where they are, of course, and with an omnichannel approach. How do you see this particular challenge these days?
Yeah, so I think it's important to sort of take a step back and look at the environment in which we're operating in, to sort of answer that question around, whether omni-channel works. And I think sometimes we kind of get bogged down into the tactics and what we're trying to accomplish, and we sort of forget to lift our heads and think about the context in which we're living, and how we would like to receive information. We get very sort of focused on a process and the way that we've sort of done things in the past in pharma. But we really can't live in a bubble. I think there are two things that have really changed in my mind, that sort of completely should shape the future of how we're going to interact with people. One is, of course, the internet. And although it seems obvious and it seems like it happened a long time ago, when you look at the grand scheme of things and how we've operated in business, actually the internet didn't happen that long ago, at least not an internet in which you can really get your information on a sort of timely basis. And I think much of our pharma model was designed and based on a pre-internet age. And so I think we've been talking for some time that needs to change, but to your point, I think COVID's an accelerator. And so I think there's phase one that's, we've been very ingrained in this model, and the reason for that model of a face-to-face model actually makes a ton of sense. If you think back to the way we've always done business and the way that you've always sold, regardless of what business we've ever been in the history of humanity, there's always been this concept of information parity. So that the buyer, the term buyer beware basically means that the buyer has less information than the seller does, right? And so when you look at how that interaction happens, the seller has a lot of information. The buyer needs to be careful, but the reason for that interaction is because the buyer needs the information from the seller, and the seller is going to provide, and therefore, we organize these face-to-face interactions to be able to share that information. Well, in the grand scheme of business over the history of humanity, internet comes along, and now all of a sudden there's information parity. And I think the question we've been asking ourselves around how we're going to change the dynamic of how we're going to communicate with people actually comes from a change in that information parity, where all of a sudden you're no longer in an information asymmetric world. You become in a world where customers can get the information that they need if they want it. And so I think that was the first catalyst, which we really haven't fully caught up to, frankly. And then the second one is COVID, which has accelerated the way we want to reach information. Frankly, we wouldn't be able to work and do all these virtual meetings, and my daughter's doing virtual schooling at home. We wouldn't be able to continue with our lives if it hadn't been for the internet. Imagine if this pandemic had hit 20 years ago or 30 years ago. I think we'd all be in a very different situation. And so, you look at the business world, COVID is absolutely accelerating the trend that we were already on. So this trend to go towards more symmetrical information and really meeting each other rather than pushing information from one direction to the other has definitely accelerated. And I think that those channels will also accelerate. So I don't know that we know exactly how we're going to communicate in the future. I think we sort of felt like we were starting to figure it out. And I think that within this new world, and I think we have to embrace it as a new world, I think that that's going to be sort of the second phase that will determine how exactly we're going to interact. But I really believe it'll be for the better, because I don't know about you, but I know the way that I want to get my information, and our customers aren't any different.
Definitely. So we see that maybe the most popular doctor is definitely Dr. Google, right, with almost 1 billion health questions every day. And there's this also very interesting case coming from Medscape that they had almost 2 million unique physicians searches in terms of different medical information view, etc. So coming to you, Sat, customers are looking for answers online. So that's obvious fact. So how do you see this trend will look like in the very soon future?
Yeah, so I think, Dario, COVID has sort of accelerated all the engagement and the need for information for all our customers, be it HCPs, be it patients, right? For pharmaceutical companies that interacts a lot directly with HCP, what's becoming increasingly important is how can you provide clinical, backed evidence, curated content that's very relevant to that particular customer or HCP, be it an oncologist, be it a rheumatologist, whoever, you want to target. And also, in places where sort of those places which are already part of their ecosystem. So a lot of these HCPs, they have provider portals, they are engaging with payers portal. So rather than trying to figure out, to create yet another channel, which is very pharma specific to communicate that information, I think more and more pharma is looking to provide information at places where they already exist. There are many platforms these days where HCPs reach out to get information that's relevant to them. Things like Figure One is almost like a social media for HCPs, and they can get high quality content. Up to Date is another platform where pharma is putting clinical and medical information. So I think, again, going back to what Sarah was saying, COVID has sort of really put in more octane into the need for information with existing channels. And what's important for pharma is to find the right place to provide that information, which is already part of the ecosystem.
Thank you, Sad. Chris, let's move to you. Can you maybe compare those new channels for pharma versus the established channels for the pharma or for the customers?
Yeah, so I mean, I think as Sarah touched on, really nicely, when you look at the recent, just how recent the internet has been in terms of opening up new channels, and when you look across this range, you have some which are focused on functions within the company, so those sort of physical touch points, and many, of course, are focusing on digital touch points. And in only the last 5 years, we've seen a totally different landscape around channel possibilities open up, and there's no sign that that's going to slacken. So when we think about the use of messaging channels, something as simple and ubiquitous as the text message has evolved into WhatsApp, has evolved into WeChat, and all these other different ways of direct connection, which might work really well if you know the person. If I'm talking to an HCP and I want to have a discourse with one of the people I know within the medical affairs team, say maybe an MSL, that's an ideal channel. And it's one of the beauties we're seeing is the evolution of specific channels which suit different purposes. So the idea of just lumping calling the internet or calling digital one thing is missing one of the great opportunities around, and sort of takes us towards personalization. Personalization is a two-way street. It's not just about the experience that you can provide to customers. It's also about the experience that you create internally and the opportunities that maybe open up for reps to be able to deepen their engagement, to be able to better support their customers and provide more direct value on a one-to-one or small group basis, and how that complements what the wider organization's trying to achieve when it thinks about the customer journeys around campaigns. And if we sort of think back to that Medscape perspective, when they're working with pharma companies, they tend to be focusing on content-led campaigns. So they're going after a big specific audience, probably at a specialty level across multiple markets. That tends not to be an especially personalized engagement, apart from the individual member of the Medscape community who sees that campaign. Is they're seeing it because they fall into the segment for how that was designed. I think the fact that you've got this view that you see in this slide has grown considerably in only the last couple of years, and what we see is probably is less focus on not just the physical capability. So, for example, on the far right, when we see that still very strong channel preference around a face-to-face detail, is within that context of detailing, that is happening in different settings. So clearly, COVID, we've seen this rapid acceleration of, across the industry, across all industries, around, the use of virtualization technologies, Zoom, Engage, Lifetime, all of these different solutions to enable, whether it's a one-to-one or a small meeting, communication, discourse with the customer. That sort of, emphasize that the rep plays a valuable role. But one of the challenges in the wider context around experience is making sure that what happens in the field is understood and reflected in what the rest of the organization is doing, that they're learning from each other as much as they're learning from the customer themselves. So I think I expect to see this picture only get broader, and to see a greater distribution of an expectation around what channels we use for different purposes. If I want to learn about a brand, I will engage with a promotional channel, whether that's a rep, whether that's a brand site or the other. If I want to learn about the underlying science of medicine, I'll go to those sources, and I'll know as an HCP where I need to go for my needs. I don't expect to find one place where suddenly everything, all my questions are answered in one easy go.
Yeah. Good point. Daria, I think another thing I would just want to add to that is, to me, it's not just all these different channels or different digital destinations where a HCP or a customer can go. I think the true value, especially for pharma or life sciences, is how can we take these different transactional digital destination and channels and bring them together to collectively harness their value for an HCP and move our relationship primarily from transactional to more of an advisory role, right? I mean, so if an HCP is interacting with channel X for something or a channel Y, how can we have that horizontal view as organization, of that HCP, and then start using different insights and different learnings to offer differentiated sort of value services to that HCP. And I think that's where even the power of omni sort of engagement really comes to bear.
Absolutely, fully underline this, Sat. Especially, I would say that we are still mainly focused on this era on push marketing instead of pull marketing, right? And on other angle, actually, we all speak about experience, or at least we started to speak. But if you ask 10 people about what and how they would define the experience, you would get like 12 answers, which means that we still didn't figure out maybe the metrics, the key components of delivering experience inside each particular. Sarah, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I think to that point, we all curate the information that we receive, right? So my news doesn't look anything like any of your news that you receive in the morning. We pick and choose what we want to hear from. The stream of news that we receive and the information that we receive is entirely designed by what we want to hear about. Which comes to, I think, the complexity as well of different realities, and you see in society almost like some forks in the road where people have completely different views of the world based on the information that they curate themselves. And so, I think I think that Chris and Sud make really good points around, the more we understand how customers are generally sort of curating their information and how do they receive it, how do they choose to take in that information, the more that they will come and get the information that they need. And we just have to be there for them to be able to pull on it, to be part of their newsfeed. And I think we still have to, refine a little bit how we're gonna make sure that it does feed into what people need.
Absolutely. Staying with you, Sarah, with another question, which is what are the new channel, or what is the new channel dynamics, for instance, social media, and how must life science navigate benefits from these channels?
Yeah, so I think we inherently have a need to connect. So I don't think that, and what's interesting is that as much as we haven't been able to see each other during this pandemic in person, I think because so many people, regardless of your environment and the walks of life, are living through essentially the same or a very similar experience, we're kind of more connected than ever. You know, time zones seem to be less important. Whether or not you're connected to the office is less and less important. And so from that perspective, although we can't always connect face to face, I think there's never been a better time to actually connect with people, where you can relate to a similar experience. And so I think that that face-to-face interaction is never going to go away. It's just going to change. So if I look at your multi-channel monologue, I think we've been moving away from that in sales anyways. You know, we hope that it would never be a monologue. But I think that it's also about keeping that face-to-face and the important connection amongst humans, but also being able to curate new channels. And I think that all the multiple avenues that Chris covered earlier are definitely going to be ways to communicate. But I think that we have to sort of offer a menu up to people that they can pick and choose from. At the same time, I do think that there are going to be new ways to communicate that we hadn't imagined previously, and probably within the next 2 to 3 years. You know, if you look at how other businesses are changing, you know, Square is reinventing the bank, the same way that Napster reinvented the music industry a while ago. And so I think we always have to think that this environment will change dramatically, and that we have to keep our ear to the ground for, you know, there's the obvious ones that are already there, including the Medscapes and the emails and the other channels that we're sort of getting more used to. But I think we also have to look out for new innovation.
Thank you, Sarah. In meantime, we launched a poll with a question: do you believe the CRM your organization is using is enough to offer HCPs and patients a seamless customer experience or journey? And let's see how people voted. So the results are that, of course, we are once again in average field, right? Which is that 50% is disagreeing. And this is actually, I would say, expected, because still, I would say that CRM, in pharma in particular, if you compare it to some other industries, it's like at least 5 years behind, right? How would you comment on that? Maybe we can start with Chris, because he's working with not just the typical CRM vendor, but Omnipresence is doing the customer experience, let's say the next era of CRM.
Yeah, so I think it's sort of, you know, but in a way you have to look at the question. So it comes down to, you know, what do we even mean by customer experience? And if you look at, you know, at how CX or customer experience is defined by, you know, many industries, they're essentially looking at the digital service relationship. So that exchange, that if I, you know, visit a website and I'm looking to buy something, then what is that experience like? Now, that's probably, you know, okay to look at from a sort of business to consumer basis, but we're not in that sector. So, you know, what is customer experience in life sciences? Well, the reps, I know, our field organization are a tremendously important part of creating customer experience for those target customers that they engage with. And CRM plays a critical role in enabling that, in allowing us to organize, in getting the content to the right people, and being able to provide a range of touch points that the reps can manage. But then if you step away from the field and look at the rest of the organization and how they interact with HCPs and healthcare organizations, often they fall totally outside the footprint of CRM. So we've got, you know, often a quite big, complex application or platform that's very focused on one part of the business, a very traditional part of the business, but it's not really serving the needs of other parts of the organization, which have their own channels and their own purposes and their own, you know, goals and objectives. So that doesn't really set up a great situation for, if we want to think, I want to have a seamless experience for my customers or my patients. You know, I would, you know, that you know, 50% disagree. I would very much go with that. Sorry for the long answer.
Of course. Sarah, Sad?
Yeah, so I would say, you know, I'm actually in the camp of I agree. And the reason I say that, at least in large pharma where I have the most visibility, we use your SFDC, Salesforce.com, or Viva. All these are fairly robust, state-of-the-art CRM solutions. Where the challenge I see is do we have the right processes, the right data to really maximize the value of these CRMs, right? The intake of data that happens from different channels into the CRM sometimes is not as fluid. The processes that are needed to manage that data quality is not that great. And then in some cases, many companies don't even have the single source of truth of an account, right? So customer master is key to kind of have that 360 view of any customer, which CRM really helps. So I think that what is out there is not fully utilized, and it's more equally sort of because of some of the processes, the data, and the enabling capabilities which may be lacking than just not having the right CRM. So that's my point of view, and I basically fall in the agree sort of component.
Yeah, I think you bring up some good points, Ed, in that are we fully utilizing the capabilities of the CRMs we do have? And I think that that probably, we've done a lot of rep training as well, even for the simple things that are available on our CRMs that aren't fully leveraged necessarily, whether it be one-on-one emails or a follow-up by marketing or a follow-up by mail-in. A lot of the simple things probably aren't leveraged enough as they are. I think on the other hand, we also have some inherent sort of internal silos where you can't necessarily get the full view on some other parts of the business, whether that's some marketing capabilities or some medical capabilities. So I think as an account manager, I think we have some more thinking to do around how to make that more seamless by making sure that we have a 360-degree view, where sometimes I think it's our own rules that sort of get in our way. And do we have to sort of push on some of that internal regulation and how necessary some of that is? Obviously, we need a clear distinction between medical and sales, but I think sometimes we may be a little too conservative, which in fact hurts the customer because they don't get the seamless experience that they could otherwise.
Definitely. Following what Sat recently mentioned, that the CRMs in overall should be data-driven, right? I would like to ask Chris about the social listening and reporting for life sciences. What is your experience in terms of this? Chris?
Hear me?
Chris?
All right. So I want to use an analogy to help us, think about what, how to approach this question. So a lot of us have been involved with or worked in field forces, and you knew the people in the team who are the real high performers. They had they always seemed to be that bit better prepared. They almost knew what the customer was going to say before they spoke. And this is what we're talking about. We talk about social listening and other aspects of customer experience and the data that's involved. It's doing that on a grand scale. So, and that in itself raises the great challenge of CX, that you are looking at a volume of information, not just about one HCP and what do I need to plan for based on what my previous call or 2 or 3 calls were, what meeting they just attended, that kind of information. You're gathering in intelligence on actual behavior, on actual demand, what channels they're using, what was the content they were looking at, what was the level of engagement, where did they go next, all of these sorts of aspects. So if we look just on one particular topic, say social listening, it is using a new set of channels to start with, one which social media has been I suppose raised lots of concerns in terms of how it's used, if it's used. It was one of those areas where pharma was arguably very late to the party in terms of using it. And now I think, that's changed very rapidly, and, embracing, where it can be used appropriately. But being able to take that information and process it in such a way that it becomes meaningful to the business, that it actually helps to drive decisions rather than, frankly, confusing people. Just the sheer volume of data that is flowing. If you think about, around a single channel, say take Facebook, and you're running a series of pages or campaigns through that, then that in itself, if it's being seen by a significant group, probably say of patients, for example, and you're trying to derive insight from that, you can't do that manually. It's impossible. Then take that and multiply that by that sort of factor of X, where it's the real world of the amount of data that's flowing into your organizations from both your internal channels, but also all of these external ones. Now, social listening is as a tactic is to try and distill insight from all of these data points, but it has to be seen in the context of of what else you're doing as well. And I think to Sarah's earlier point around information parity, if you can't get the information you want from the source that's being offered, you'll go and find it somewhere else. And one of those challenges is as soon as they step outside, a patient or even an HCP steps outside of where you have good, strong, evidence-based, knowledge, then you're in a risky place. So you want to have your information, available to the people who need it. So it's allowing them to define where it is, having a listening approach which is very open. So not just listening to what you're doing, but you're also looking very closely at what the industry is doing and what patients are doing. Where did they go for information in terms of social properties, and are you there? And that raises these great challenges of this is a very, very fast moving space. So putting all of your money on one particular social property is probably going to disappoint, because you'll find that your customers ultimately are widely distributed across different properties because of age, because of where they are in the world. There isn't one magic social media site that does that meets. As much as Facebook might like that to be them, that's not the reality. So being where your customers are is just as important here as it is anywhere else.
Definitely. Maybe just to add, but does it really mean more? Does really more mean more? Because, for instance, if you are using all of those digital channels like Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and lots of others, does really this means a proper approach? Because you have some cases like on Facebook, for instance, where people really don't want to listen to corporate brands at all.
I think that's one of the challenges of push versus pull. Of course, their business model is entirely driven by the desire of advertisers to put their brands, in the stream of attention. So, and how do you determine relevance? Now, of course, the ability to micro-target might mean that what you lose is the attraction of, oh wow, look at all of those active users. Wouldn't it be fantastic if they were looking at my advertising? And you're instead going to a very, very closely defined, nuanced audience of people who will actually pay attention to that, or are much more likely to pay attention. So, in all of this, again, it goes down to you're trying to define, a very tightly defined segment of people for whom this is relevant. And of course, and if you think about the huge breadth of different treatments, medicines and the science behind them that the industry creates, it's perfectly logical that why would anybody want to be interested in everything? It doesn't make any sense. So you have to be very, very careful about defining who those audiences are in exactly the same way as you've been doing for years in your HCP engagement and how you segment your prescribers and influencers. It's the same. It's very much the same approach. It's just we've now got to do that across, this dramatically broadened range of channels and properties.
Thank you, Chris. Sad, let's move back to you. We all agree that there are new sources of real-time customer data. And how would you describe this social listening and proper reporting?
I think from a source perspective, beyond the social listening, right, there are many now consumer-driven or patient-driven digital diagnostic tools which are out there, which are creating, sources of data. A lot of these Fitbits, Apple Health watches, and Apple Watch that we are wearing, and they generate a lot of data that's used in real-world evidence. A lot of pharma is actually engaged in a lot of observational studies, whether it's around quality of life after taking a particular therapeutic drug, or any other clinical differentiation that they may want to highlight in peer-review articles, or to show differentiation or value to payers. So the sources of data beyond just the social component that you talked about has just grown exponentially, and more and more are being used in real-world evidence by medical affairs teams, by clinical teams, by your teams that are doing value-based contracts, so on and so forth. So those are some of the things that I think are beyond social that we've got to keep an eye on.
Thank you, Sad.
If I can add to that, Dario, I think real-world experience or real-world data will be crucial, and is going to give us sort of more up-to-date information. The challenge that we'll continue to face is how long it actually takes us from the time we have that information to be able to get it sort of published and ready for use from even if it were from a medical standpoint, but certainly from a promotional standpoint, it's even longer. And so by the time things actually make it into the label, it's old news. And so again, if we look to COVID as an example of how to break the mold. We never thought we'd develop vaccines so quickly. We never thought we'd develop therapeutics so quickly. We never thought we'd see data before it was peer reviewed sort of just pop up online. We never thought we'd see these regulatory approvals so quickly. So I hope that we're sort of paving a path to make sure that in the future, it will no longer be acceptable for it to take 2 years to get a publication into the hands of customers and to be able to communicate on that, but that we can actually shorten that time frame, because I think that's when we become much more relevant, as when we all work together to actually put the information in the hands of the customer in a much tighter time frame.
Yeah, well said. And I think, Dario, the other thing I will say, the current situation has really sort of brought a lot of different players in the industry together. Not, whether it's pharma, whether it's labs, whether it's government, tech companies, right? So that velocity and that collaboration to, harness the data, listen to the data, and then make some meaningful use out of that data has been really expedited as well through the current environment.
Yeah.
So customer experience leaders definitely need to create channel-friendly content, and there is this interesting acronym, the 3S. It should be searchable, snackable, and shareable. Most of all, shareable, right? But this is the final stage of success. So, Sad, how actually will proper digital medical content be written in the upcoming years or short term?
Yeah, so I think a lot of different media is being used now to communicate into what you're referring to, even snackable bite-sized content, right? We're starting to use, you'll see, it's nothing novel or new, but more and more usage happening with virtual reality to communicate mechanism of actions for a particular drug. A lot of small animated digital content that's being shared with different ACPs, KOL, to communicate the same content that may just be written in text, right? So I think on the medical affairs, we are seeing a lot of some of these newer modalities and endpoints being used to sort of communicate scientific evidence and information.
Thank you, Sad. Sarah, let's move to you. Intelligent journey planning, definitely very hot topic. And how would you plan a proper customer journey true touch points from your very own experience? And could you maybe even give some examples of that?
Yeah, so I think definitely there has to be sort of a sequenced approach where in an ideal world you would sort of have a really great connection face to face that the representative can then leverage through some kind of reinforcement of whatever message they wanted to communicate, they wanted their customer to retain, followed up by a reinforcement of that message and sort of a next best action type of scenario where the customer can sort of, based on what they're thinking, can follow the next best message through some of our digital mechanisms that we have already today. So those are things that are already within our capabilities. I think what I'd like to see moving forward, and those are things that we're already working on and refining, but I think what I'd like to see moving forward is, I think in the context where we realized that sometimes that initial face-to-face contact hasn't been easy to establish because we haven't had the same level of face-to-face contact that we have had previously, is how do we, rather than just taking the same platform and, instead of having a face-to-face, we just use a virtual conversation, how do we actually turn that into an experience instead of just trying to replicate the one-on-one conversation through a virtual mode? So instead of just having the conversation through the camera, how can we sort of enhance with messaging, enhance with video, enhance with other things that are actually going to bring the experience to life rather than sort of seeing it as a stepwise? And I think that, and ideally in a world where it would be completely customizable based on the customer, and the representative can help develop what that optimal experience looks like depending on the customer. So somebody may want something that's totally marketing, and they may like all the animation and the videos, and someone else might want something that's very scientific, and how do we tailor to both?
Thank you, Sarah. Chris, back to you. What is actually this unified customer universe? Can you maybe speak about this a little bit?
Sure. So if we think, one of the things that we've touched on quite a few, as we've been going through the session, is talking about not just the range of channels that we need to work with and be on top of in terms of how we utilize them, how we collect data from them. But remember that behind the channels often are different parts of the business. So this idea, and I think Saad touched on it, the importance of if you think about a customer master, and that provides one of those sort of foundations for how we operate as a whole business. So rather than thinking about siloed capabilities, that different departments not talking to each other and very much going off and doing their own thing, and creating dissonance and fragmentation in our approach. The essence of customer experience is about a unified approach that one part of the organization learns from another part. And in order to do that, as we've touched on already, data is going to be really important. We have to be able to understand what's going on and derive meaning and insight from that and make that available, so that decisions we're taking, for example, around that idea of that intelligent customer journey, that should absolutely be informed in part, not just on what we're doing in our part of the world, and maybe if it's in sales or wherever, but also about what's happening from medical affairs. Is that individual a trialist? Are they attending a virtual satellite meeting, and so on and so forth. And being able to take all of that meaning and support not just what we're actively trying to do from a promotional standpoint, but also support the business functions. So when we look at that infinity loop, it's about covering. We had that left-hand side of the view was very much focused on the business activities, those different functions: sales, commercial, marketing, market access, etc. That are there to promote and to service the markets that they operate in. Then the right-hand side was very much more focused on patient activities. So moving from what has often been very fragmented approaches around patient engagement very campaign driven, to one where we're focused on patients from an experience in the same way as we do with customers. And to do that, you need common data. You need a set of applications that work together, so you can actually plan and execute as based on the best possible real-time knowledge about what's going on with either that individual or that cohort of customers or patients. So I think those are some of the sort of the key trends. If you do that well, if you have a unified approach, and that might be achieved through some complex integration, and that's very common in our industry, but we have lots of systems which are connected through the work that the IT organization do. Data moves around, plans can be shared, things like that. But simplifying that so that they can focus more on the experience aspect and less on the risk of replication, on doing the same thing many times over across different parts of the organization, but in different ways that risk collision, risk creating dissonance for the experience we're trying to deliver.
Thank you. And the last question addressed to all of you is that the obvious goal, final stage, is to create this unified 360 customer profile. And we all buy, for instance, and purchase on Amazon, right? And the funny part is that they definitely have this 360 view about all of us, but we never ever spoke with anyone from their customer support, which is quite shocking, right? So how would you actually describe this, and is maybe AI the answer, or what is maybe the answer to achieve this 360 degree view? Maybe we can start with Sarah.
So I think your point brings up an interesting thought, that there's sort of a fine line where there's a fine line where it goes from super insightful, how did you know that I like that, to kind of creepy, why do you know so much about me? So, and I think in pharma, given the sensitivity of the environment we work in, and obviously each therapeutic area is slightly different. I worked in HIV for 10 years, where the way we communicated with customers was we were very cautious that they wouldn't sort of feel like we were breaching some of their personal space and some of their confidentiality, perhaps around whether or not they were HIV positive. So I think that that's it's a really important consideration, is just making sure that we're not overstepping based on the therapeutic area that we're in. And there's and I think when it comes to pharma and health in particular, people are much more sensitive. I don't really mind if an Elsa doll pops up because I've been looking for gifts for my daughter for Christmas. I kind of think that's cute, but if I had if I were suffering from something that I didn't really want other people to know about, I think I would feel somewhat violated that had been suggested to me. So I think we do have to be very careful in pharma, and that's one line that we need to tread very carefully.
Definitely. Saad?
I know. I think Sarah said it really well, especially with EHI, personal health information, and all that stuff, and a lot of regulations that are different than what Amazon has to sort of manage, HIPAA, GDPR, and all those things, right? So we have to be a little bit more mindful from data privacy and sensitivity. But ideally, right, at least from a pharma perspective, the end sort of recipient is the patient, but most of our therapies go to the patient through our HCP. So we are able to, through having authentication and connecting with different HCP through different channels, create a good view. And it goes back to that customer master. There's still a long ways to go, but we do have some level of a 360. Maybe it's not 360, maybe it's 240 sort of a view of a customer at this point.
Okay, Chris?
I'll go back to something I think said, right at the outset. It's that this is as much about how we can operate better as organizations. And that is, that's really central to making that perspective, that all-around view, the 360 view of a customer actually valuable, because the 360-degree view, is always based on somebody's perspective. If I'm a sales rep, I've got a different point of view. I've got different drivers. Of course, I'm focused on my customers, delivering great care and optimizing their treatment of their patients. But the way in which I can operate as a rep is very different to the way that I'd operate as an MSL or a CAM or so forth. And I think recognizing that we've tended to operate a lot of focus goes around what happens through the field force. Yet the field is only engaging with part of the market. You have target customers who these are the individuals who reps will try and focus on seeing, but that might only be 30% of the potential healthcare professionals that the clinicians in that particular specialty. So, part of this whole discussion around CX is, it's a whole market approach. And a doctor who isn't actively being seen by a rep is no less important to their patients than a doctor who is. So, having visibility of what all the customers, all healthcare professionals are trying to do in terms of finding out about different treatments, about optimizing the care that they're providing, is, to me, that's one of those endpoints. And I absolutely take on board the aspect of that Sarah brought up around sensitivity, and the ethics of data and information are really critical here. And this is something which I think pharma is way ahead of many other industries, because it's so ingrained into thinking and practice in the industry, that the importance of respect for the individual, for the patient, for the provider, but also the sensitivity of that information that you're handling. But I think as an industry, we're in a much better position to be able to move to an intelligent CX position and an ethical CX position, rather than one which is just exploiting every last data point we can for some kind of promotional or financial edge. That's not a problem I see us having.
Thank you, Chris. We are left with 4 more minutes, and I picked one particular very interesting question from the audience, which is, when we speak about new channels, are there any boundaries, like in particular channels, like for instance, what about TikTok as an example? I think that's a good question, which means, are there some channels which you should avoid in absolute every case, or you should adapt? Like
so I can give that one a crack. I think it kind of depends on what you think you can communicate that's valuable through that channel, right? I don't think that there's anything that's completely off the table. I mean, you could do something fun through Snapchat, for example, right? And do a really funny background that would be relevant, if it's relevant to your brand and it's relevant for the experience, And so I think it's just about making sure that you're true to what your purpose is for the brand and what you're really trying to come across, and that whatever channel you're using is well connected to your values and what you're what you try to convey through your brand. So I think we live our brands today in that 360 view rather than just through a simple campaign.
Thank you, Sarah. Sad, Chris, any comments on that?
I think Sarah covered it right. As long as you conform to the purpose, the message in a compliant way, and know which audience to reach, I think any channel is fair game. A compliant channel is fair game.
Absolutely. I would say that we all-time return on this: more is not always more. And I don't know if you know the information, but for instance, Apple is not having a corporate Facebook account at all. It's not existing, as an example. But we all know that they are delivering an extraordinary experience across every single channel. Right? So maybe with that final words, I would like to thank you all for taking part in this very interesting panel. And we will publish this on our YouTube channel as well. So on demand, you can watch it anytime. Sarah, thank you very much. Sad, of course, as well. And Chris, was really a lot of fun, great pleasure, and keep very good care, and hope to see you next year in amazing Dubrovnik.
Thank you all.
Thank you so
Take care.
much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks for having us. Thanks. It was a pleasure
Thanks,
chatting
Sarah.
with you. Bye.